Hey, I'm Chuck from Conduktor, and today we're going to take a look at Conduktor self-service. First, we should discuss why self-service is needed, what kind of pain you're avoiding when you set up self-service early, and what kind of pain you are having if you don't have self-service. For this, I like to look at this DJ Khaled suffering from success meme. This is the idea that, a lot of teams in your organization are adopting Kafka. They're doing event-driven architecture. They're having success, and this success is turning into a problem for you if you own the central platform team. You now have to manage the resources and approve everything. So you're in charge of permissions, you're in charge of provisioning, you're in charge of the health of the platform. And as Kafka takes off, it has this network effect because now you have multiple teams tapping into the same real-time data sources to create their own real-time data resources and so on and so forth. So it can be an exponential growth in value. It's a good thing, but it can become overwhelming. And there are tools out there to help with this. There's lots of automation tools to automatically provision resources and to enforce policies to a certain extent. But what these tools struggle to do is they struggle to put the ownership burden on those application teams and to shift responsibility there. So that's what Conduktor Self-Service is designed to do. Conduktor Self-Service was created by some of our product managers internally who have worked as central platform owners at some very large Kafka installations, and they've had these painful experiences where they saw themselves become the bottleneck for Kafka adoption and actually hurt the innovation of their company because they weren't able to automate fast enough. Of course, through hard work and pain, they solved these problems. And the idea was to solve it once in a disciplined way from the beginning and offer this as a capability for anyone. Now, anyone can benefit from their experience and use these self-service tools to avoid this pain or to get them out of a hole if they've dug themselves into one. Okay, so let's take a look at the concept here. The idea is pretty simple. It's an application-based access control. So you have a central platform team and you have application teams. And the idea is that the central platform team is the one who defines ownership for these different applications, and they define policies and constraints that these applications must follow. And then within those constraints, the application team then takes ownership over their own resources, and it actually can provide access to people and other applications as well without involving the central platform team. So this is a delegated permissions model. It's centered around the concept of an application. We're going to see this in detail as we go through this tutorial. Just to break down what these objects are, let's look first at the central platform team. They define the application, and that application has information about who owns the application. They define application instances. So this is specific information about service accounts and permissions that should be associated with the application. And it's called an application instance because you might have multiple of these. Think dev and prod. Then we have topic policies. These include policies about how topics should be configured. For example, replication factor and number of partitions. It also includes information about naming conventions. So it can enforce standardized naming conventions. And to aid governance, it also allows you to enforce the creation of certain labels, metadata labels for your topics. And we'll see that later as well. Okay, so that's the central platform team. They define the rules of the game, and then they hand ownership over to the application team. And the application team owns resources here as well. So first here is the application group. So this is how the application team manages who can access their application resources. So they might create a group for developers, a group for support, a group for DevOps, etc. So they're managing permissions on their own application. Then we have Kafka resources. So these are your topics, connectors, schema subjects. Then we have the application instance permission. This is the one that really accelerates the value of your data streaming platform. This is the application instance permission. So this is what allows an application to provide access to another application. And the assumption here is that there's valuable data in your organization, and with proper discovery, you would have some applications would be able to find the value that already exists and ask for permission. And when they ask for permission, they ask permission directly to the application team that owns that resource. They don't have to go through a central platform team to do that. Okay, let's see this in action. So here we have a quick start, and the idea is to clone a little Git repo, run some Docker, and see how this works. And just to see how it works, here at a high level, we have the central team has a repository, and that repository contains a couple of applications. We have an application team has a repository, and they have application groups, permissions, Kafka resources there, and we can go through and run this example. All right, the first thing to do is to bring up our environment. We'll do docker compose up-d. This will create several resources in your environment. It'll pull these Docker images, which may take a little while. But for me, I have the Docker images already pulled, and we're creating basically 2 Kafka clusters. We're creating an instance of Conduktor as well as Conduktor Cortex, which is monitoring and alerting platform. And now we should be able to log into the UI. If I go here to localhost, and password is admin@conduktor.io, and the password I'm not going to tell you. And here we have the Conduktor UI. We have a dev cluster and a prod cluster. And let's go ahead and start creating some self-service resources. To create our self-service resources, let's start with creating an API key for the Conduktor API. And this will be an admin API key since I'm logged in as the admin. We'll call it admin. Generate the key. And we can generate this using the CLI or here in the UI. But what we're going to use it for is we're going to go here into our Conduktor CLI, and we're going to supply that API key, and that will allow us to exec into this container and run these self-service commands and create these resources. So let's see how to do that. First, I'm going to run docker compose up again. It's going to recreate that CLI container, which will now include that API key. And now we can shell into the container, and we have access now to the Conduktor CLI, and with it we can create these resources. So as an admin on the central team, I'm going to start by creating some central team resources. I'm going to do Conduktor apply these groups, and we created a group here. We could see what we actually created. So here we've got the central team, and under groups we have this website analytics group, and here we have a couple of members. Next, we'll create some topic policies, and we'll see what those are in a minute. And then finally, I'm going to create the actual application for the website analytics. And when we go into our applications, look at website analytics, we'll notice a couple of things. We have first the application, and the only thing here for the application that's needed is the owner. So this is a Conduktor group, so we're assigning ownership of this application to this group. And then we're creating two application instances. One of them is Website Analytics Dev on the dev cluster with a service account, and the other is Website Analytics Prod on the prod cluster with its service account. And let's go in the UI and explore these things that we've created. Okay, so if I go here into Application Group, I see our Website Analytics application. It has information for us. It has some groups we haven't created yet. And it has instances. Here we see prod, and we see the resources. We have prefixed ownership over consumer groups, subjects, and topics, all prefixed by Website Analytics dot. And similarly for dev. And when we create this, we can actually also go into service accounts, and let's look at the dev cluster, our service account. And we see that prefix ACLs have been applied to the service account as well. And this is actually an important point because Conduktor offers a UI as well as a GitOps platform. So what we're able to do is actually keep those permissions in sync so that people, humans who log into the UI, who are associated with this application, have the same permissions as the Kafka service account underneath in terms of Kafka ACLs. So in the UI, the human gets the permissions, and then also at the Kafka level, the Kafka service account gets the proper ACLs as well, and these are in sync. So this actually saves a lot of headaches. Okay, so as the central platform team owner, I've done my job at this point. I've created the application, I've created the permissions, and then within this, I hand ownership over to the application team to manage their own resources and grant permissions within their own scope. So let's switch gears and become a member of the application team. And let's look at the dev application instance and create a new API key. So this is the API key that this instance will use. Oh, one thing that we didn't talk about were the topic policies. Let's quickly look at those. So a couple of topic policies were attached to this instance. We have a generic dev policy, we have a naming convention policy, and then we have a more specific naming convention policy. Let's take a look at this one. So this enforces a naming convention, and this is a more generic naming convention. And then the dev topic policy. So think that you might want a generic dev topic policy where the replication factor is 1 because it's a dev environment. You don't care about resiliency, and partitions are 1, but because again you don't care about scalability, and you might still want to enforce some labeling. So here we see metadata labels, and you can define your own custom labels. In this case, we have a custom label called data criticality, and it must be one of C0, C1, C2. So this allows you to enforce not only configurations, but also metadata for the purpose of governance more generally. Okay, let's go back and create that API key for this instance. Create this key. This will be called Web Analytics Dev key. And just like before, we're going to go to our Docker Compose. Going to exit the container, Docker Compose up -D to recreate that container. To pick up the new API key, let's exec back into there. And now I am the developer working in the dev application instance. So of course, the first thing that I want to do is I want to see if I can hack this to give myself more permissions. If I go into the central team repo, instead of having permissions on topics prefixed by Website Analytics, I just want to give myself permission on all topics. So we can do that with an empty prefix. And I'll do Conduktor apply -F self-service, central team repo, applications, website analytics. And we can see I'm not actually able to hack myself more permissions because I'm missing this governance application edit permission with the API key that I'm using. I the API key that I'm using is tied to an application instance for this website analytics group. So that means I don't have access over any of these resources that belong to the central team. I only have access to the objects that belong to my application team, and in particular, the dev instance. If I go ahead and clear this and create some topics, you'll see something interesting. So a couple of topics were created. This was website analytics, admin, clicks, page views, add to cart. And some of them were not created because I didn't have permission. We have the application instance called website analytics dev does not have permission to create this topic in the prod environment. So if I go into topics here, you'll notice there are topics that are scoped to the prod environment with different configurations than dev. And with my API key that I have right now, I can only create resources in dev. I cannot create resources in prod. So this is actually a great failsafe because in your CI/CD environments, you would scope the API key to a specific environment, in this case dev. So you wouldn't accidentally overwrite your prod configurations because you're using a different API key. Okay, and that brings us to the accelerator here, which is sharing. Again, the power of Kafka is when more value can be derived from the same data. So, in a bad case scenario, you might have 4 or 5 different applications that are doing stream processing pipelines, and maybe the first 10 steps of those stream processing pipelines are the same. And it's a horrible waste of resources, duplication of effort. And if they just had a way to discover what other teams were doing, they might know that there's actually some refined data that they can start from so that they don't reuse the same resources over and over again. So this idea of visibility and discoverability is super important. You discover what is available, and then you can ask permission to use it. And when you ask permission to use it, you're asking the actual team that owns it. You're not having to go through a central platform team to do that. And so here's a topic catalog. And if I'm somebody on a different team viewing the topic catalog, I can go through, I can look by application name. I can look by cluster. And I can also look by these metadata labels that we talked about earlier. So here we have data criticality, description, domain, a couple of these other things. So this really allows you to discover what sort of refined data is available to you and then explore it. So if I go to this add to cart, you'll see, a description, retention, you'll see different labels that are attached to it. You'll see schema if it's available. And if this looks good, you would simply subscribe. So in this case, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because here I'm the prod instance asking for access to a dev topic. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but you can imagine if you were a different application team and you would make a request on behalf of that application instance. And what's important about this is you're requesting on behalf of the application instance. You're not requesting as an individual human looking at the UI. And so what this does is this generates an application instance permission object. And that team can go ahead and merge that pull request. And it will actually give you, in this case, read access granted to your application. And what's nice about that is anyone associated with your application can now log into the UI and will have access to those resources in the UI. And also the Surface account underneath will get the appropriate ACLs in Kafka to then interact with that topic as well. And to underscore this point that Conduktor self-service unifies the UI with the underlying service account, to log in as a different user, let's log in as Bob. Docker compose, I believe we had a Bob. at Conduktor.io and Bob pass. Okay, so if I log in as Bob, I will automatically see all of the topics associated with my applications, and I won't see other topics that may exist. And if I wanted to create a new topic, I'll just call it Bob with 300 partitions. It's going to tell me no, I don't have permission to do that. So I need to, this violates a topic policy that's in place. So let's do website analytics.bob. And I should have permission to do so. It's going to yell at me again. And it'll say this time you don't have the right metadata label. So again, these topic policies are being enforced. I'm a person named Bob, but I'm associated with this application, and this application has constraints applied to it. So I have to work within those constraints. I will add a label, data criticality, and this will be C0, and I should be able to create this topic now. So to summarize, we have Conduktor Self-Service gives you this application-based access control where the central team defines the ownership of the applications and the constraints that should apply to those applications, and then delegates ownership to those application owners. And those application owners then hold responsibility for providing permissions to other people and for configuring their resources. And so bring it back to DJ Khaled. You won't be the bottleneck anymore as a central platform team. You'll have different teams discovering high quality data in your organization, making use of that and innovating even further and streamlining the adoption of that central data streaming platform at the heart of your organization. You might think that you're giving up control. Now, you've defined constraints, but it still doesn't mean that your application teams won't do dumb things, waste resources, things like that. So this self-service model actually works really well in conjunction with another feature of Conduktor, which is called Chargeback. I won't get into it now, but just to show a quick view, the idea is that you have accountability for your application teams by collecting usage data of your Kafka, and you can actually charge back or show back the resource usage on a service account basis or on a application basis. And what this means is, if a development team, isn't cleaning up the resources, you can hand them a bill and you say, this is what you owe if you don't clean up your resources. And you wouldn't be surprised that they will quickly clean up their resources and make good decisions if they're being held accountable with Chargeback. Chargeback is also super interesting because it can show you what's happening in terms of organic growth. Like maybe there's a topic that is suddenly getting a lot of fan out. There's a lot more read access happening. That tells you that maybe that data is important and more groups should be looking at it. So just different insights that this can give you. So again, I'm Chuck with Conduktor. I hope you try out Conduktor Self-Service, and I hope you have a better day than this guy is. All right, thank you.